Welcome to the Pantheon.Plus Rewind.
Hello, folks. Welcome to episode 18 of The Rewind. For anyone new to the podcast, this is the show where Minus and I recap the week that was in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen by talking about any official news from Visionary Realms. We highlight community comments and discussions and anything else Pantheon related. So for our regular listeners, we got a huge treat last week when Joppa, the creative director for VR, dropped into the live chat during the YouTube premiere. And he was actually feeling pretty generous too. He gave us a couple small beans to chew on, which we'll talk about a little later. But it's not the first time VR staff popped in to say hi, and hopefully not the last. But I just wanted to express my gratitude to VR for always being willing to engage with the community and like shows like ours. So Minus, my friend, what that said, it's going to be tough to top last week's show, but I'm willing to give it a try if you are. But what do you say?
Yeah, no, I'm jealous. I don't get to hang out at the show anymore. And all of a sudden Joppa's showing up, and that's awesome stuff. I saw the note after fact while I was slaving away at work. So I'm happy you guys had a good time. I'm, like I said, very jealous, but that's awesome. Thank you, Joppa. Yeah. Thank you, VR, for the support. Lots of stuff to talk about last week, but I think we're in some pretty good shape. We have some good stuff to talk about today, so I'm ready when you are.
Yeah, let's go.
This week in Visionary Realms news and notes.
Okay, so in the section here, we talk about VR news, and actually just before recording, we were actually treated with some news. The summer newsletter update came out. Now, it's a pretty short update, but I'm going to hit on some of the key things here that were within it. So it was announced via PantheonMMO.com that the emails for PA5 were indeed sent out to testers, and they announced the dates of September 5th and 6th for the shakedown testing. That's going to be a Saturday and Sunday, and I think that's Labor Day weekend. So in case you missed previous talks about what the shakedown testing will look like, here is a brief quote and how they kind of summed up the goals and what that experience would be like. So they started the quote with, "To start, Dire Lord and Shaman will be two available classes for the shakedown. The combat system has undergone a major overhaul and is now much more responsive, robust, and a rewarding experience. These two classes' combined abilities cover a wide array of spell and ability types, so they will give us the best bang for our buck when it comes to testing. Other classes will be available in what they're calling Pre-Alpha 5 proper." Now, also included in the PA5 shakedown is climbing. You're going to want to see this, they said, and perception and quest content. So we're actually going to see climbing, the two classes in perception and quest content in that small shakedown period, which is pretty cool. So yeah, and after that's done, we're going to get what they're calling Pre-Alpha proper. And this is going to give us a chance to test more, if not all the classes, which I believe it is going to be all. More features, more content, and in longer play sessions for what is being kind of like told as a full progression experience in Pantheon. They also stated that this is one of the final steps before Alpha, and that's a quote. So I don't know. Take that for what you will.
I saw that right away. I was like, my eyes went right to that line. I was like, oh.
So what might get lost in the shuffle here is they included also 3 screenshots in there from the dev stream, and they're a better quality than watching it on a stream, obviously. So you can find those linked at the bottom of the newsletter, which is in the description below. So I'm really excited. I think we've all been waiting for these dates. We all know this is going to be a huge piece of getting to Alpha. If not immediately after the testing and bugs are resolved. So, Therek, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I was glad to see those emails go out as planned, because there's always, that sort of fear in the back of your mind, like something's going to get delayed or something's going to happen, but that didn't. So I'm super excited. And, like how they said, you're going to want to see this. It's like, yes, we definitely want to see that. So stop toying with us. We know we want to see it. But this, like you said, to me, this means when they do the shakeout, like we're going to get to see some of that. So it's something to look forward to in September, possibly. And yeah, no, it's really exciting. And before we move on from the VR news, I also wanted to follow up on what I said in the intro a little bit about the beans that Joppa gave us last week on the premiere. There was 2 of them, and the first one, sort of the appetizer, if you will, is that, and this isn't a huge revelation to anybody. It's sort of like, yeah, duh, but that Pantheon will have one-handed and two-handed spears available to players as weapons, which Zerg is very happy about because he's a big fan.
He's been pitching spears to VR since I met him, so
yeah,
the fight won.
Yeah. When he gets a cause, he doesn't relent, right? And so the second one was actually more significant. This what Joppa said about we were talking about durability a lot last week, and in terms of items, how they're going to deal with durability, and he confirmed that items aren't going to break due to durability loss, which is huge. We had suspected that. Like, I know we talked about it, and we were kind of like, no, there's no way they would do that. He just confirmed that, and he actually went on to sort of add to the discussion a little bit as well, because how my position on durability was that not so great about it. But this is the quote that he said in the chat. He said, you need multiple varied gold sinks to control inflation. Durability is just one ingredient in Pantheon's gold sink recipe. So that's good to hear. It's not something they're going to put, all the emphasis on to try and deal with the whole economy issue. There's going to be other avenues available for controlling inflation, that kind of thing. So again, it's great to have him in chat, and just a couple little pieces of clarification for us. So I loved seeing that.
Awesome. Yeah, again, very jealous, but awesome stuff. And I'm happy that you got to interact with him there. Hopefully we'll see him again on another premiere.
Definitely.
So moving to Twitter, which we always do, there's usually 2 questions, and it'll be the same today. There are 2. The first one is fan sites. Do you run or support a fan site for your favorite game? And if so, what do you like most about them? So I'm smiling because obviously that's a funny one. But so Drac Attack obviously put out their PantheonBlog.com, your home for Pantheon profiles, Pantheon memes, patch notes, and the adventures of Drac Attack. He said he started a fan website because he knew he would have more fun participating in the community that way, which is really cool. Gownart says, I like fan sites that are useful, like fan sites for crafting tips, tricks, or build guides. Says, gamers don't respect websites anymore. Too many people are self-motivated, and things like Discord have every average person acting as if they can be just the community and bring it to themselves. The payoff is not worth the hard work required, and the respect isn't there. They went on to say, these are levels to everything in life. I'd keep it simple at best, like downloading a WordPress shell. Heck with custom coding, changing the language there a bit. That way, when it doesn't work out, you didn't put much effort in anyways, so not much to risk and also not much to lose. Anything else hurts. Well, we're doing a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a pretty harsh take. I don't know. I like... they're not all fan sites are like, following that sort of mentality. There are definitely some, but you don't want to paint everybody with the same brush.
But I think at the same time, he likes them, but he's just kind of saying that as a whole, the people don't typically. I don't know.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Furious Pierre, I still love that. I don't know why. And I love his logo.
Again.
Yeah, he's back again. I don't run one, but they're great. They get to the point, leveling guides, best weapon combos, boxing tips, shortcuts, all the help the casual players. Nefel says, why, yes, I administer Pantheon Crafters. I think fan sites are important for the community, though it is far too easy to spoil game content in many cases. More thoughts in the forum. Arkham Cleric says, simple answer. I enjoy the work put into them. It helps keep the community connected and get different perspectives of the game to cross-reference points, counterpoints, or theory crafting. Scott, who's M. Sanderson D, says, the time of fan site forums has largely passed with Discord. I do think there's still a role for database-driven sites, but as we are in the age of podcasts and live streams, the traditional fan site model is done. Good thing we're going against tradition.
I can kind of agree with that. Like I see what he's saying there. I think that, it's like there's definitely more types of mediums available, but I don't think they're obsolete either.
Yeah. Kendi64 says, I went to server sites long ago. There was a forum for Fiona Vey only. Otherwise, I just go to information sites like Alakazam and guild forums. I personally like the server forum. Discord may work well for talking with people more directly, but not so search friendly.
Yeah, good point.
Jorgen Wickstrom says, sites like Alakazam, EQ2 Wiki, and Trader's Corner, etc. is vital for the continuing growth of a game. They spread vital information about the game, show new prospecting of players that the game is alive and thriving. Forums and Discords keep players connected, sometimes for years. I agree with that big time.
Mm-hmm.
Bidoman says, absolutely, the competition for solid resource on quests, items, location, strategy, etc. is necessary to develop a community. Eric, who goes by @Fowler, says, he actually ran Vanguard Rangers. I don't know if you know anything about that. It sounds like
I sort of remember it. I sort of remember it. I don't have a clear memory of it, but yeah, cool.
So he ran Vanguard Rangers, Rift Seekers, along with Boons and Conditions, which was a Guild Wars 2 site. I love getting involved with so many different community members. They were inclusive and strove to be reliable and engaging out-of-game experience. It was wonderful to see their collective output. Blafer, what's that?
I wonder if he's planning on starting a Pantheon site. Sounds like he has lots of experience with it.
Yeah, we should reach out. Blafer says, what I don't like about them is that they spoiler everything. What's in the game and how to find stuff. I just don't click on that. Great way of handling that. But when the spoiler is in the title, it's hard to avoid. Man, I would love that you have to read quests so you know what to do. Eric Campbell says, I don't currently run, but they're absolutely responsible for getting my start in the industry, so I 100% support them. I love a combination of news, opinion pieces, and a place to chat about each. So I'd say we're biased a little bit here, Therek.
Yeah, a little bit.
But with that said, I've always enjoyed a good go-to site for the games I played. That includes Alakazam, Thoughtbot, Wowhead, Icy Veins, and the many that are like that. I think it's fun to have a resource to look at ideas, see things you didn't think of, and a way to analyze trying new things. Now, on the reverse side, I do think the issue is that when these resources become one person speaking to the masses, like this is like the only way, like when that's said, which is how WoW became, because what had happened is that the WoW class Discords got a lot of power, and there were a couple people running each Discord, and they were all united, and they had a Discord to meet with each other. It was like the mafia of WoW. I could tell stories forever when we started digging into it to try to expose it, but we won't get into that. Oh, it's crazy, dude. It was crazy. So what had happened is they gained so much power in their Discords that they could blacklist even the big sites like Wowhead or Icy Veins. So what happened is they gained control of all the guide writing and all the best in slot and all the best builds. They gained control over all the sites. So if you went to Discord, if you went to Icy Veins or Wowhead, it was the same person writing the guide, or at least the same collective. So there was no other opinions. It literally became, here's the best and only way to play for every single class. And I think that is extraordinarily damaging to a community, because that's where pickup groups take the most damage when people are like, no, you're not playing the right build. It doesn't hurt you so much in a guild, but in like the overall perception of, I read on 3 different sites that build is worthless. That's because the same people were writing it. Wow. It's crazy, right? That's a true story. Like I could go on for so long. I won't, but it's crazy. So I think that when you hear only one voice telling you what to do, that's a super bad thing, especially across multiple sites. So what I'll say is this: Pantheon.Plus will never be that way. We're looking to make tools where anyone can make a guide, have a voice, discuss their ideas. I think when a site gives the power to the supporters, enables creation and a platform to share, that's when a community site truly wins. So what are your thoughts on this topic as a whole?
Yeah, I'll kind of dovetail off that, because when I read this question, it made me think of my days playing Hearthstone. Like I played Hearthstone solidly for 5-6 years, and you rely on the sites. So, I looked at Hearthpwn a lot. Vicious Syndicate came along a few years later. Icy Veins was in there too with some of their stuff, like just deck guides and meta information, that kind of stuff. And, it's funny because I think that would have the same problem if it was the same person who was writing all the sort of best decks, what's the meta right now, that kind of stuff. It would be very destructive to the game, and it wouldn't, it would make the overall game health very poor. So I think one of the things about those sites was that they all sort of had different people coming from different perspectives, different opinions. Are you building a fun deck? Are you building a serious competitive deck? Are you just messing around? Are you trying to pull off some crazy sort of, mechanic? So when I get really into a game like I was with Hearthstone, those are the kind of sites I need. And I still think they're a great reference. And, if a game requires that kind of depth of information or, needs that kind of a commitment from you, I think that's a good thing. So, I'm still a big user of sites. Like I must go to PantheonMMO.com at least once every day. I check out, Massively OP, every couple days kind of thing, because I just think they're a good resource. So yeah, no, I think you're right though. You need to have diversity of opinions.
Yeah, without a doubt. So the next topic that they talked about was, and warning everybody, I need to have a little bumper that's like warning minus rant incoming. Just to let
siren
people
or
know.
something.
Yeah. So until that happens, warning. What separates older games from the new, and what do you like or dislike about how games have evolved over the years? So we'll get to my opinion last, but Basgrim chimed in and he said, older games were made for fun. Designers were more willing to take risks and try new creative ideas. But as time goes on, corporations realized how much money they can make on games and started making games that were specifically designed to keep players addicted and paying. Meldor says simple. It's like everything nowadays, not just games, the intention. When you make something to be the best thing possible for the consumer, you get positive results. But when your first intention is to make money, the quality content comes second and it's bound to fail. I'm going to get back to that. Actually, no, I'm going to stop right here and talk about that. Here's exactly where I'm going to say that this is not true. Xbox versus Sony. Xbox right now, for whatever reason, no matter what they do, like the internet craps on them. Xbox is putting out what's called Game Pass, which me and you are big fans of. And they've come out and said that it is a huge they're not making any money from it, really. And not only are they not making much money from it, they are canceling Xbox Live memberships, which is, $10 a month for them or whatever it ends up being. And they're canceling that and giving that away for free. And then they're going to have Game Pass instead at the same price that it's at. So they're going to get rid of a completely money-making thing that costs them pretty much nothing. And then they're going to substitute it with something that they're putting a ton of money into and making not much on to just try to help grow their consumer base and do the right thing for the consumer. Microsoft is making decisions within the console realm that are so consumer friendly that it is unbelievable, like forcing game developers to give free upgrades into the next gen so people don't have to rebuy games. You know how hard that probably is? Because those developers don't want to do that. They're doing so many things that are consumer friendly in the industry, and the gamers themselves just crap on them every time they can because Sony LOL, because it's the cool thing to say on Reddit. So I get this idea that has come up that like developers are just trying to make money. But let me ask you something. This has been going on and this theory has been run out there for a long time. So are you telling me that everybody who goes into school to make games and all these indie companies are going in to make money when they're the same people that are posting this kind of stuff and it's the new generation getting in there? I just don't buy that. I really don't. I think it's the player base that's fickle. It's not as much the developers as the player base and gamers want to make it out to be. It's more the gamers themselves. And I'm going to rant more about that, but what did you want to say on that?
I'll keep it real short and sweet. I mean, it's always been about making money. The games industry has always been an industry. It's never been a co-op, So it's the climate is different in terms of what a reasonable profit margin is. I mean, I'll give that the opinion that like his point of view is basically saying it's all, it's too money driven. And to some extent there is a point where that becomes true, but it's always been an industry. It's never been a nonprofit, right? So, I mean, it's just, there's other things going on. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. So Project Valhalla says new games are blatant cash grabs. Older games have to be made well and thought out because if there wasn't in game stores and there weren't patches every day after launch. No, but in the day when games were bad, we just dealt with it and played through it.
Or you were just screwed. When you bought the game and the discs were bad, like if it had a bad disc, you had to do mail it in. I mean, I'm going back 20 years here, maybe more, but you had to mail in your disc, wait for a replacement. Like, come on.
Remember installing old floppy games? You'd get to like floppy disk 30 and it would crash. It wouldn't
fail.
work. Yeah.
I know. Like 6 hours wasted. I know.
Yeah. JJ Paderia said older games had challenge. Newer games tend to appeal to a broader demographic. Therefore, a lot of the challenges removed. While it's a smart business model in terms of making money, it alienates people who are looking for something specific. Good point if you're talking just about MMOs, but my problem is this category is about all games, and I would say that the difficult games movement is happening more than ever right now. Demon Souls is a huge example of people playing really hard games now. So while sometimes that might be the case, I think in MMOs, that's a great point, but I think in the overall gaming industry that's not always the case.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know if I'd be so agreeing with that. I think that the outliers are the really difficult games like Cuphead and Dark Souls. Like those are the outliers. They're not the common games, I guess I would say. But
if you're someone who wants to play a challenging game, they're there, right?
Yes. Yeah, they're there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then now, like I said, this is a ranting topic. I'm sorry we're stopping in between and chatting here. M. Sanderson, again here, he's in again for this one. He says, time required to feel you've accomplished a task has been shortened, which is also one of the main reasons MMOs grew as they did. Take a Hike says, active paid GMs and moderated chat. So again, very MMORPG driven. Profits squeezed that out of games, and upsurge into consequential toxicity skyrocketed to the point that now the response is, if you don't like it, leave the channel. Nathaniel James says, not much new to add here. Games have been dumbed down in content and difficulty. It became less about a developer doing what they loved and more about pleasing shareholders. I'll pay a sub, but if I want a game to release, that cannot be rushed into completion in a matter of days. So he wants a game just, to be built out. Sorry, sometimes It's hard to read some of these Twitter stuff because they have to shorten it, right, to fit it in. Let's see. Phantom Strike, I think, is what that goes by. I dislike that everyone gets a ribbon game design. You should have to work to see the end game, not easy mode it. Also, stop with the copy-paste end game raid dungeons with difficulty sliders. Make unique dungeons and have the dungeon itself be part of the progression. So you can see like a lot of these people are going into MMORPGs, which is fine. And some of those points are really good for that. But again, this is kind of an overall gaming thing.
And that's where my take is going to go in the overall direction. So yeah.
Yeah. So US Heretic says, I miss the grind and lore of just exploring in general. I miss 45-minute flight times to Mara as a horde player in WoW. I miss the long grind through zones where you would pretty much had to complete them in EQ2. I miss grouping. I do, however, like WoW's Raid Finder. So that's an interesting take there. The Sparrow says, I loved when back in the day we bought a game and it would last at least a month in our hands. Now that's a great point right there.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I dislike how sometimes we go through 4 or 5 games a month now. I enjoy the feeling when a game does not make me have second thoughts on the time I'm spending with it. That is probably the Sparrow. You win. Comment of the day from me anyway. That's a great one.
Great take.
And at Mochi Colorful says, newer games tend to cater to the mass markets, so things have to be dumbed down. So I posted in Twitter forum, which isn't very long, and my post said, when I started gaming, I was young, and gaming itself was a small crowd. We were nerds, and it wasn't mainstream. Gamers treated each other so much better then. There's so much respect. And now it's about labeling what's best, picking a side. It's like gaming has become sports. So here's my rant. It's not super long, actually. But so I wasn't far down the list where people started blaming WoW, by the way, for all of gaming being bad, which I think is funny. It's funny because this issue is not specific to a genre when they're bringing this up. But of course, as MMO fans, I guess I get it. But it's always WoW's fault. Gaming is no longer niche, whatever you want to call it. Like it was when there was just a brotherhood among gamers at one point. I remember that it didn't matter what you played because you were a gamer. You could relate and give each other high fives because you were gamers.
When you found somebody in school who was like, "Oh, you play video games?" Or like, "Yeah." You're like, "Oh my god, it was a huge deal." Yeah.
The question wasn't like, "What are you playing?" And then the group just everybody wanted to hear what each person was playing. Like that was the big deal. And the group would just excitedly talk about whatever games, and everybody wanted to experience them. Like if you said, "Hey, this game's really cool, check it out," everyone was excited to do it. And I'll say it again, gaming has become mainstream, and it no longer solely is a hobby that you share with others is what hurt it. I mean, if you look at D&D and those that are into strategy board games, those people still have that connection and drive that we used to have in gaming because it's about togetherness. It's about experiencing and not judging, right? Like you don't go play board games together to judge each other and be the captain of the world. You go just kind of sit down for the experience and the friendship of it. It's the same thing with D&D. Now, if you look at gaming, it's not I'm a gamer anymore. It's where you're ranked that's talked about. It's the type of gamer you are. Like everything is being so put into a box, and people are also trying to fit into these small categories. And it's just become just about everyone standing more than just relating and being together. And again, I know I'm ranting, but this is what changed gaming. People can call it a money grab, whatever, but any business, including the games you love, we're trying to make money. That's what businesses do. And I still can't get why gamers pretend that that's not a fact. That's like the new go-to. Even passion projects are in it to make money. Time in itself is more valuable than anything in the world. And no one is going to spend the kind of time it takes to make a game without any payback. Nobody. It's not worth it. It's sad. It's really sad, Therek. It really makes me sad because today's gamers lash out against everything and barely take any time to talk, understand, or think logically about it. Things like Metacritic bombs, where they just all attack a game because it's a cultural fun thing to do. Like attacking a game before it even comes out. These things aren't productive. They're not productive. I miss when if someone didn't like something, they just moved on. But now people just attack everything. Gamers went from being together to tearing everything around them down so they can stand tall as the all-knowing, and it sucks. It really sucks. I mean, again, super rant there. I think a lot of people agree with me and they can feel that. Like, I just don't understand where we're coming from in gaming. We're at a time point right now, Therek, where we have more access to great games than we've ever had in our entire life. And instead of going and finding those games like we did for the King, or like I did for Hellblade, or Thumper, that game, it's a rhythm game. I would have never played that, but I found it. Instead of going out and finding one of the thousands of games that's at our fingertips, people would rather just complain online about the one game they want to play and make perfect instead of going and find a game that they're going to enjoy. And it sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, that's exactly right. What you said there, we have too many games. We have too many games available to us these days. And people might say, well, you know, I want choice. I want this, I want that. But it's like, it changes when you have this kind of choice, it changes how you take the game. And that's my point. My take on this question is what's different about games these days as opposed to the old days. Like back then we didn't have a choice. You saved up your money to go to the store to buy the game. And that was the game you were committed to. And then you had that game for, 6 months. That's what you had, and not only that, but you're committed to it because you had to read the manual. You had to learn how the game worked. Today, games they've become throwaway in a big way. I think there's not enough need to commit to a game. I don't think these days. And I think that changes how games are made. So, you can sort of do a chicken or the egg thing here where it's like, well, it's our fault as gamers because we've demanded made these demands of the game companies to make games a certain way or lower the prices to the point where there's just so many of them and they're so affordable that we have all the power as consumers. But then the bad side of that is it changes how games are made, right? They're made to satisfy that quick throwaway sort of society, culture of gaming right now that we have. And I really miss the days when, I saved up a lot of money to, to go buy that one game I had my eye on for a long time. And then that was my game for the summer, right? Yeah. So how we do things and how games are made are very interrelated, I would say.
And I'll tell you what too, man, there's one I'll never forget, NES, right? My grandmother had this huge garden in the front of her house. It was like the whole front of the house, but it looked small, right? Like, oh, it's not a big garden. She's like, if you pull all the weeds in the garden, I'll let you buy a game, right? So this is NES. Anybody who knows this game was awful, but it looked awesome. It was the Silver Surfer game. I was like,
the hardest game in the history of the NES.
I was like, oh my God, I want this so bad, right? I couldn't look at it online. I'm a Marvel fan. It looks cool, right? Looking at the back of the box at Hills in Pittsburgh. So I pull weeds and I think it's going to take me like a couple hours to pull the weeds. I'm pulling weeds for like a week, right? Finally get them all pulled. I'm like, yes, let's go. I go buy Silver Surfer. I put it in and after about a half hour, I knew it was the worst game ever. But guess what? I worked my ass off for that game. And like you said, that was my game. So I played, never got very far, but I put that game in every day and tried to beat it.
And see, today, if that happened, what would you do? You'd be online in 10 minutes going, this game sucks, F this, F that, you'd be all over the internet with your comments and your hate, right? Like, it's just different. And it's a really unhealthier way of gaming, I think, So.
And it's funny too, because you brought up like the whole reading the manual and having to invest in learning the game. Well, the problem is if the game's too hard to learn or it takes a time commitment to learn, people are going to give up before they try to learn it. So now you have this interesting onboarding process, which Brad was really, really worried about when it came to Pantheon. The conversations I had with him were always about onboarding. How do you bring people into this game if it's going to be that hard? How do you bring people into a game where they're going to die and struggle, but yet convince them to keep playing in the onboarding process? And that's a super real thing. So people want hard games, but if the game is hard and has hard systems that require you to actually dedicate yourself to and learn, people are going to quit. They're just going to quit. People quit now and have less resilience than they did when we were kids, by far.
Oh yeah, 100%. And that ties right into what we talked about last week with the death penalty stuff. That's a very real conversation that I think we should probably have on the show at some point, because it's a very real issue.
Yep. Okay, well, that's it for VR news and notes and all my ranting. When the Pantheon community speaks, we listen. So let's dig into social media and see what the discussion is all about.
Okay, so checking in on the official forums this week, we are going to start with one of my favorite sections, that being fan fiction. And it may be like summer outside, but it kind of feels like Christmas time, because now 2 weeks in a row, we got an installment of Ben and I's fan fiction called Amensol's Shadow. I'm not going to say the whole title this week because I said it last week and it was a mouthful. I haven't had the chance to read this one yet, but I'm certainly looking forward to it. I always try and find that perfect moment, when it's a nice day, sit out on the deck and, with a nice cold beer and sort of enjoy the story. So I haven't got there yet, but we'll maybe this weekend. And from there, so we'll go and do our introductions. So three new members of the community this week over on the forums. Jaladorm was the first one, and they said, "Hey, I just wanted to say hello. I can't wait for the launch of this game. Started my MMO journey back when EQ launched on day one. I played for many years until EQ2 came out and rocked that for a while, until I lost interest because it was just the same thing day in, day out. Tried my hand with Star Wars, never got into it. I was always an avid player of Fallout, and looked forward to the newest version, only to once again be let down by another MMO. I'm hoping Pantheon is the game that will respark that interest and excitement that I had for MMOs." And then Huntsecker said, "Hello, everyone. I just pledged and I thought I would say hi. I'm over in England. So like most of you, I've come from the Wizards of the Coast endless quest books." He's been into AD&D, LARP, and the MUDs. Yeah. So he's been playing MMOs ever since that, and admittedly says some were better than others, but they all had one thing in common: you guys. So the community. And he says, "I'm super excited about this one, the community especially, and what it means for the future of the genre. I look forward to our adventures together and peace and health in these strange times." And then lastly, Nick Buck said, "Excited to be here. Can't wait for the game to finish. I played EQ1 on the Zek PvP on and off for 8 years. Currently playing Project 99 EQ and Rise of Zek 2.0, which I think is an EQ emulated server." He says, "This game is everything I've been waiting for. No tedious mandatory quests, and the challenge seems real. Hit me up if you're joining the PvP server." So he's really into PvP. So cheers, you guys, and welcome to the community.
Definitely welcome, everybody.
And from there on to Reddit, there was a discussion that tied into one of the news pieces from last week, so I wanted to include it. If you remember, Joppa last week talked about how faction is going to be implemented in the next pre-alpha session, saying, he talked at length about basically it's going to be more than just, NPCs being whether they're hostile, indifferent, or friendly towards you. It's actually going to affect how much information they share with you, what tasks they might offer. And the other thing that I don't think we mentioned last week, but I want to note too, is that it's not only faction with like big groups, like say you lose faction with Thronefast Militia, but faction actually applies individually to individual NPCs as well. So that's kind of a cool thing. So the question on Reddit about this point, what comes from TR DeLacy. He's a regular poster over there. Here's the question he asks: "Do you believe faction changes should be displayed to your character as they are in EQ, or should they be hidden from the character? And the only way to determine if your faction has changed is to interact with the NPCs to see if their behavior or their dialogue changes." So just for clarity's sake, before I get into the community responses here, in the pre-alpha sessions we've seen so far, you do see in the combat logs when there's a faction hit, you've lost faction with this or gained faction with this group. So the question is more of a hypothetical, because appears that this isn't going to be how it is, but it's a hypothetical. It's an interesting hypothetical question anyway. So firstly, Ixar said this should absolutely be displayed to the player when something changes their faction. It's incredibly important information, especially if factions actually matter. The Lost Cause said, add in the potentially daunting task of repairing a faction. If it looks like it would take 100 hours of grinding versus 10, it's something I need to know. Situation Soap said, not displaying important user information to the players doesn't make them explore more. It's just user hostile. Massive Split said, yes, it should be visible. So simple response there. Meth the Madman says, always have to be careful implementing stuff like this. It may seem like a good idea to a lot of people, but probably think it's a tedious mechanism. I think it could be fun, but I can also see how awful it would be to become kill on sight without even knowing. Yeah, right. So basically it's going to come back to that. Salacious Lion said, we have to remember this is a game, and that's more important than this level of immersion that you're talking about.
But my immersion, Therek, everything's immersion. Coin weight's immersion. Death. How do I respawn with my gear in this fantasy world? It's immersion breaking. Sorry, like that's our weekly immersion rant.
We need to make like a bumper with like that immersion.
We can just put right in the middle of a segment. Yeah.
Immersion is like, immersion alert. I like it. There you go. Perfect. So Natha said, I don't know how it was done in EQ, but imagine having to kill 1,000 enemies to level up your faction rep. There's no in-game way of tracking that. So you either count each kill and hope you don't lose count, assuming you imagine doing this.
Tallies on a paper.
Yeah, you got your little like calculator out. You're like, hold on, I lost track. He says, so you pursue the goal with an end you can't see and spend hours clicking the NPC to see if the dialogue has changed after what feels like another 1,000 kills. War G247 said, faction change messages are important. I don't know so much about having an actual bar with numbers, but I don't see why not. At least let people know when they hit certain milestones in faction from some menu. Don't know about that, but we'll talk about that in a sec. Our buddy UR Gatorbait said, I think what you said sounds cool on the surface, but I think it would bother and frustrate many, including myself, if there wasn't an easy way to know where you stand, especially in relation to where you want to be with that faction. And then lastly, moderator over there, Sparks Interface, said, as for my opinion, I do think we should get generic, you have gained or lost faction messages. No, I don't think we should be able to see our faction numbers in the UI. Basically, just leave it at con messages, so like they're an ally, they scowl at you, that kind of thing, but not actual numbers. So
we can't have it in the UI because WoW did that. So
did they?
Yeah.
Really?
So if WoW did it, we're not allowed to have that in Pantheon.
It'll kill the game, man. It'll kill everything.
WoW killed everything. Apparently, WoW killed puzzle games, as far as we're concerned with the Twitter part here. Like Tetris was great until WoW came along. So
it's the cause of all social ills in the world, the evils of the world, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't play WoW.
COVID. I mean, if it wasn't for WoW, there'd be no COVID.
WoW caused COVID.
WoW caused, yeah. Breaking news on the Rewind. WoW caused COVID. Good.
Somebody ate an orc and got the first, they were patient zero or something.
Bad.
Crazy. Anyway, so, I mean, this is one of those topics where it was actually pretty much of a consensus, and we don't actually see that quite often, saying that faction information change does need to be there when it happens. And I like the outside the box thinking I do. And that's why I chose this topic to talk about. But again, I'm going to agree with the majority here. The way the Joppa described faction and Pantheon actually makes it much more important that we do get notified, because like if you were to take the opposing view, you could say, well, this might force you to think about what you're killing in relation to the factions that you care about. So like before you go traipsing into Black Rose Keep to slaughter all those, residents there, you should consider how it might affect your Thronefast faction. Or even as Joppa suggested, it might affect your personal faction with Queen Amensol, right? So the problem with this, though, is that faction relationships would have to be basically explicitly stated somewhere. Like there'd have to be a quest or some sort of text you'd have to pick up somewhere along the lines, hopefully, that would tell you how killing a mob, certain creature, person, character, whatever, would affect your faction. So I like the idea of the immersion, immersion alert. I think it creates, but it's just way too nebulous to make that actually work. I'm assuming you're agreeing with me here. Am I correct?
Yeah, there's no reason to hide faction whatsoever. I mean, there's things that work and we need to just keep them and move on and fix the things that are broken. If we fix the things that work, we're wasting a lot of time. It'd be like, your car has one problem, right? Like you need to put oil in it, but you change the whole engine instead. Like I just
take it to the shop. You're like, look, tear it apart. And when you're done, change the oil.
Yeah, sir, all you need is a quart of oil. No, I want the whole engine rebuilt, but sir, that'll be, thousands of dollars and you could just get, no, don't tell me that. Take the whole engine apart. Like why can't we be satisfied with things that work? Like, and I get the point of this. This was a creative post. This isn't a knock on like the guy who made this post in any way, shape, or form. It's an interesting thought process for sure. Like it would be cool if you were able to have access to talk with these people in an easy way. It would work a lot better in like a futuristic MMO, like Secret World, where you could talk to people over like a Bluetooth headset. So you could remotely talk to people and see what it's like and link with people or call people. But like, could you imagine having to run to town 1,000 times to see if it worked yet? Like that would be so painful.
No, it wouldn't work. Yeah, it's like I said, it's a good idea, but no need to go down that path. I don't think so. Okay, so over to Facebook. The Facebook groups continue to get bigger. So again, props to Chase Masters over there and all the moderators that are working on the Facebook groups. They are doing a great job. Before we wrap up this segment, there was an article that came out this week from community member Josh Piedra, who we talked about, JJ Piedra, earlier in the Twitter section. So he's a professional writer. He wrote a piece for the outerhaven.net called "Does Pantheon Rise of the Fallen Still Mean Anything to Me?" And basically, it's an update to an article that he wrote 2.5 years ago when he first learned about Pantheon, and his initial impressions at that time. He gives a really good overview of the major development pieces, and then sort of asks the question of himself: has anything changed with me? Right? So I really enjoyed reading this piece. I don't know, Minus, if you got a chance to read it or not, but it just reminded me basically that we're all on different journeys, when we follow Pantheon's development, and what's important to some people may not be important to others. So it's always good to take stock of where you're at as well, just to keep perspective. And I think this article did a really good example of that. So thanks to Josh for this, and I'll leave a link in the description so that you can check it out. While you're there, take a look at Josh's original English light novel work in anime and manga as well, because he's just an amazing writer, and I'll leave links again for that in the description. But did you have a chance to read that article, Minus?
I did not. I hate saying that because I love JJ. I don't know if you know, he wrote, when we announced Pantheon.Plus the very first time, he put an article out promoting us that night, and I had never met him before. It was a super humbling experience, and we became friends and chatted from that night forward. And great writer for sure. His anime stuff is awesome, or manga, I guess I should say more so. He puts a ton of effort and time into it. If you follow him on Twitter, you'll get updates all the time. Just great stuff for sure.
That's awesome. And that's it for this week's community discussions.
Let's talk content creator updates and new additions to Pantheon.Plus. All right, so we actually had a pretty jam-packed content week on Pantheon.Plus. So let's start with Nathan Napalm. He put out a video discussing some of the details on faction and horizontal progression. So kind of like you were talking about earlier, this week kind of tying it together with information given to Japa on the developer stream last week. So Nathan covers examples from Chris himself, and then he kind of digs deep into what he'd like to see in Pantheon and refers back to EQ as well, and kind of how it impacted his play. So you'll get kind of a good journey there with Nathan Napalm. He also put out a video late last week, which we didn't have a chance to discuss, which were details around pre-alpha 5 in particular from that developer stream, where he kind of broke those things down, discussing what it would entail, what he expects it to look like, and his personal expectations. So check that out if you want some specific PA5 details or kind of exploring it with Nathan. Bazgrim actually put out Baz Flash shortly after last week's rewind that was added to the site as well. If you want a 60-second take on what we learned in the dev stream, that's for you. But he also put out another Baz Flash to highlight the 2020 summer newsletter that we talked about at the beginning of the show. So a couple quick 60-second videos from Bazgrim. Now, for us here at Pantheon.Plus, we've been talking a lot about the idea of this month-long discussion. And we kicked it off with our first video in two-part series we're calling Putting the E Back in PvE. So in this series, we're looking to discuss how Terminus is fighting back against the player. And in part one, we discussed climates and acclamations, digging into kind of what they are, how to combat them, and what details we have so far in these systems. And I really, really, really want to thank everybody who watched because we had some awesome conversation across all the Pantheon social media platforms, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, more. I just also want to thank you guys because this is the first video of our series and it's our second fastest growing video ever. So I'm just always constantly constantly amazed always when you guys in the community support us like you do. It keeps us going. It means a lot to us. We don't ever take a single hit for granted. So please never hesitate to give us feedback and opinions on how we can continue to earn that following and participation from you. It's very important to us. So the next video is, spoiler alert, already finished. So part 2 will be out early next week. We hope you enjoyed as much as part 1. We're actually going to be talking about atmospheres and artifacts. And I got to tell you, the couple people that I've shown it to just for a little bit of advice and look through in case I missed something, have all said they've learned a little bit from this one, which is exciting to hear. So hopefully as a community, you guys will all learn something new.
Spoiler alert. It's really good. I'll tell you guys, I've seen it. It's really good.
Thank you. And then keep in mind that we're going to be pushing a Pantheon.Plus U episode that's going to tie these together. And Therek will also have a lore video coming out in the short time here as well, talking about this category. So I'm excited for all of that. It should be a fun month.
Yep.
So what's being worked on? So we have a new front-end developer. We talked about that before. He's hard at work on Pantheon.Plus. We're super excited about this. He's actually going through all of our main page and basically the whole page coding and cleaning it up and optimizing it so that when he starts building, it's going to be very easy. He actually already went into our beta site, which we have, and started cleaning up how the articles are going to look on the main page and how they're going to land on a specific page for people to interact with. So once he finishes optimizing, we should see some pretty strong progress in pushing out some new features. Stay tuned. I truly believe this next step of housing articles and discussion is going to be a huge part of what drives that site to the next level and makes it a better community resource for everybody. And then news from us, other news. So I have to be secretive about this, but in typical Minus fashion, I'll give you a small teaser here that we're working with another great content creator. And we're looking to possibly bring his vision to life as part of the Pantheon.Plus team. That's all I can say for now. But if we can work out the details, I think it's going to be really exciting for those that follow us and for the future of the site and the team. So more to come. I guess that's what I'll say there. Yeah. So that's it from Pantheon.Plus this week. And now let's deep dive into some lore.
Okay, so like you heard in that bumper, it's time for a news segment. And I'm so excited about this because I think we saved the best part of this week for the last, if I do say so. We got the VIP Developer Roundtable last week. And this one featured Justin Estulame Gerhart, the lead writer for VR, answering questions from the VIP pledges all about the lore of Pantheon. So as you might guess, this roundtable is one of my favorites they've done to date. It's about an hour and 20 minutes, but honestly, listening to it for me felt like about 5 because I was totally engrossed in it and taking notes like crazy. So what I've done actually is gone through it. I've compiled some of the highlights here. This isn't like every question that was asked, and it's not every little piece that was there, but I took out some of the highlights and some of the things that I maybe didn't know or think that may have been sort of beans and nuggets that were dropped all over the place in terms of lore. So Minus, if something stands out along the way here when I'm talking, just jump in and let me know if it catches your interest, because I wasn't sure sort of, where to go with this, but these are the things that I picked out. So
yeah, before you get going, I mean, you said that this is probably your favorite roundtable. I have to tell you guys that listening to this and contributing to it this was probably the best roundtable. And I love Joppa and he spills some great stuff and his passion's amazing. This was just a different type of roundtable. I'm not even nearly into lore as you, but I was excited for you. When I was listening to it.
I was so excited. I was transmitting it across North America all the way to you. You could feel the excitement. You're listening to Justin speak you just hear how knowledgeable, how much passion he has for this and how it's his world he's created. I love. Yeah,
he lives there. If you ask him,
exactly.
Yeah, if you ask him, the third door in Terminus, why is there a nameplate missing? Oh, well, let me tell you the story about that.
That's right. Exactly.
It's so natural when you listen to him going through these questions and how he flows and has to stop himself. The depth that he has this story written out in his head or these. Yeah, it's incredible. Mm-hmm. So yeah, please share with us and I'll ask any questions if I have them.
Okay. So the first one is actually just a simple little thing, but how to pronounce the names of one of the precursor races on Terminus. So the Jinto, I've been saying Ginto, and it's good to know that because he clarified it's actually pronounced Jinto. But speaking about the precursor races, we know about some of them. There's the Tholen, Tholen. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Giganta, or the Giants is another word, and a few others. But he actually mentioned a word that I hadn't heard, and I don't think I've read anywhere before, but called the Iguadors. That's what it sounded like to me anyway. This is, again, listening to him and not seeing it written down, so I don't know exactly how it's spelled or whatever, but if I've missed it somewhere in the lore, maybe it's just another piece of the puzzle of Terminus's early history. So that was the first one that I caught. Secondly, he gave a brief overview of what each of the 9 races are currently. So when I say currently, I mean the present year at launch, what they're focused on, what their motivations are. And there are a couple of interesting lines when he went through the 9 races. With regard to the elves, he talked about the Ember Elves and saying, quote, they're very focused on international things. So some specific things outside of King's Reach. So that's kind of interesting. Even better was with regard to the dwarves. He said, quote, there's a thing going on trying to keep Amber Fate quiet. So kind of interesting. It sounds like there's something going on in Amber Fate. We kind of saw that in the streams they've done there. They've talked about these mysteries, like why is it so big? Why are the doors so big and the dwarves so small, right? So there's something going on there. I kind of picked up on that. Potentially related to that is something he said about the dragons. He said, we learned that Telnarsis, who's like the snow dragon, he's not actually a rainborn dragon. He's not a top tier dragon, is what Justin said. And he equated the power of Telnarsis to Kazas, who is the dwarves' like descended god, descended deity, basically the primary deity of one of the primary deities on Terminus, one of the first to arrive, actually. So if you want to learn about dragons in general, Justin referenced the Night of Five Voices Part 3, which is one of the keepings of Castigue. He talked about Telnarsis. There's a part in it when they're going through the naming conventions of dragons. And he actually names a bunch of dragons and the different types. And we learn that they actually do have a naming convention associated with them. So when we talk about like naming conventions, like why elven names are sort of similar, why the ogres have similar names, well, there's a reason why the dragons all have sort of similar names, and there's a meaning to it. So that's kind of interesting. This next one actually is kind of impactful from a gameplay standpoint. And because of that, Justin provided a pretty heavy caveat saying that this piece of lore, he's not tying it into a design decision that's set in stone. So it's important to note that before I tell you what it is. But the question was about deity selection. So when you create your character kind of thing, he replied, deity selection is probably not going to happen via traditional mechanics. We want to make it special. Also, looking at the fact that we have a celestial boundary that's blocking direct access to the celestial realm, gods don't interact with you directly. It felt off to have something like that picked up right at the front end, and we want to move beyond this, having it be something you uncover in the world. So that's a really cool idea because, you think about a lot of games, a lot of MMOs, you make your character, you pick your deity, who do you follow? Yeah. And you get some sort of bonus based on that or whatever.
You have no idea what it's about because you're making a character for the first time.
Yeah, right. I mean, you're looking at it more from a gameplay standpoint, trying to sort of maximize your potential just based on what the bonus is. Yeah. But in this case, you're going to be looking at like, what's the story here? What's the reason that I'm seeking out this deity? And the benefit might be secondary. It might be more about your identity with your character sort of thing. So again, he did say it's not necessarily tied to a design decision at this point, but it's the kind of idea they're working from. So the next question was asked about the Torn Elves. And when we read about the Torn Elves, we learn that they get something called Tordanir's Sight. And it's basically referenced in the written lore, but not really explained like what it is. And that was the question. So Justin described it this way. He said, it's part of becoming a Torn Elf, involves physically losing your sight. So Tordanir's Sight is the way by which they see. It's a metaphysical sense that allows them to move throughout their area and allows them to function in a different way. So not a huge in-depth explanation of what it is, but it does give you an idea. And I didn't know that they actually lose their physical sight. I thought it was just like they gain some sort of power, but this is like they give up their actual eyesight for this. So
yeah, and one of the things he joked about was that it is not a very friendly process.
Yeah, I think that was like Joppa in the comments during the roundtable thing. It's not something like that, making sort of poking fun at it.
Yeah.
It was funny. Okay, so and then another question was a good one too. This is about the Archai. So the question was like, how do the Archai determine which element they're attuned to during their true birth ceremony, which they experience early on? And Justin's reply was, that is one of the deities of the Archai. That is the one area she's able to interact with them is through that process. It's not a direct interaction. It's more of a calling. So when they stand in front of the elements and they're basically just this child of energy wrapped in sand, they're drawn to one of these elements. So that's kind of cool. When you're making a character, if you choose to play an Archai, you have to think about your attunement, what elemental attunement there will be. And do you get to make that decision, or is that something that sort of is done through this process that Justin's describing here? So that's new information. And then lastly, this is kind of a funny one. We got a few more names. So there's 7 clans of ogres on Terminus, and we didn't know all the names for all the clans. I think we had like 4 of them or something like that. So Justin told us that one of the ones we knew about was called the Way of Aster, and it's overseen by Astergath, that's the deity that oversees that clan. I don't think we knew about that deity. And a couple other the clans that we didn't know. One is called Bloodmare, and one is called Severed Stone. The full name of it is actually Cult of the Severed Stone. And Minus, I'm sorry about this next one, but these are his words, not mine.
You don't have to be sorry. This is a good thing. Go for it.
Okay. So he called one of the names of the clans is Gorogians, I think. And he described them as being kind of like the Dallas Cowboys of the 7 clans. And he said he even hates to sully the lore with this reference, but he said they're the biggest, baddest, most popular ones originally, but they've taken a step back on Terminus. So they've sort of lost their place at the top, unfortunately. So
it's very true. That's exactly what it's like being a Cowboys fan over the last 25 years, for sure. But still biggest and baddest. Let's just. Yeah.
I'm really glad to hear you say that. I didn't know how you would take that sort of approach to characterization of the Dallas Cowboys. But
I just pinged Convo and said, "See, the biggest and baddest, not the Eagles." He didn't reference the Eagles, but go ahead.
Jan did say that he's actually a 49ers fan, so a lot of football
sports
fans
ball, sports ball.
Yeah, right now our listeners are like, "Stop talking about that. Talk about Pantheon." Stupid sports ball. But anyway, those are the highlights. I would go on and on about this, and there's a lot more interesting lore that he actually reviewed, and I totally encourage everyone to go give it a listen. You could probably expect some future lore videos from me on a few of the ones that I mentioned here, because these things kind of like, whenever you hear answers to questions, it just begs more questions. There's more questions now that I want to know. So talking lore is an area obviously I enjoy. So you can expect to maybe see this segment of the podcast show up whenever we get some new lore information. So I don't know, Minus, what do you think? Do you think we should keep doing this piece for future shows?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's funny because your excitement for lore drives my excitement, and I hope that our listeners can feel that too. Because I think without you or Chris Kane, like, I wouldn't have followed the lore. Like, I wouldn't be able to sit here and talk about things that are specific to the elves or to the halflings, all these different things that actually really make me interested in Terminus, right? Like, we're doing this whole putting the E back in PvE segment, right? And part of that environment is the stories and lore that these races have gone through. And one of the reasons I stopped playing Rift was we got to the end of the first raid and I had no idea why we were killing who we were killing. There was just no lore. There was no feeling for these epic fights that were supposed to be epic, but they weren't. So before we go into Terminus, I would say that I know probably more about Pantheon than I knew about Warcraft getting into it. And that's pretty crazy. Yeah, because Warcraft has a pretty deep history of lore. So again, that's like just getting into it. It'd be tough for them to match, the 15 years of playing. But so that excites me because I think that I get lost. I'm going to be open and honest here. I get lost in a lot of these words. Like reading like Astergath and the Way of the Aster and the Gorgonians and Tor Denir's site. I can't pronounce crap usually. So like when I'm reading these things, they don't stick in my head. So like it's hard for me to remember these things. But when you're telling stories about them or making videos or Chris is doing it, it's more cinematic to me. And in a cinematic sense, I can feel it and I can remember it better than I can just reading it on a page. And sometimes the way that the lore is written, it's tough to read. So
it's real dense, yeah.
Right. So like when people are pausing and breaking and when they're reading it or breaking it down differently, it's really helpful for me. And I hope that people like me out there who aren't necessarily lore fans can utilize people like Therek or Chris Kane to kind of maybe understand the game differently, which I think in the long run is going to make fans want to play more and experience more and be a keeper. And again, I'm into this stuff like crazy because of that. So I really hope, and I'd love to hear in the comments when you guys post any comments in YouTube, like do people like Therek and Chris help you digest the lore? Where are you in Pantheon's lore right now compared to like where you typically are in an MMO? Are you ahead of the curve? Are you more excited about the lore? Are you less excited? Like, I'd really like to hear that. But personally, I mean, like I very much so enjoyed that roundtable, and I do highly recommend, as you have, for people to go listen to it, because there's one thing to read lore, there's one thing to be interested in lore, but there's another thing to hear somebody talk so in depth about Pantheon, even if it's from a lore perspective, that makes you feel really good about the progress of the game. because the amount of depth he's able to go into on the smallest detail really tells you there's a lot behind the curtain. Right?
Yeah. Well said. That's exactly right. It's deep, and you know that depth is there. You're not worried about it. So it's great to hear. I know it has the exact same effect on me. So cheers. And I'm glad you like it. And I'm looking forward to doing more of these segments on the show. So yeah. And that's it for the deep dive into the lore this week.
Yep. So that's everything for today's rewind. We'll work on getting an immersion bumper to put randomly in the middle of us talking. And we'll work on getting a minus rant warning so you guys know how long that's going to happen. Maybe we'll put like a timer up on the screen or something like that so you know when you can come back to avoid the rant. Today was definitely a little more ranty on my behalf. I'm sorry if it came off as preachy. That's never my point, but it's just my passion coming out. I got to tell you guys, we got to take more ownership of what's happening to our games, our genre. We are responsible. We're responsible how we act, guys. Developers are humans, regardless of what you may think of them. They're going to respond to our emotional output. The more supportive we are of our community, the better it'll be. The more supportive of one another we are, the better we will be. And the more supportive we are of the game companies that are making the games we want to play, the better those games will be. It's as simple as that, honestly. In any walk of life, support helps all of us. So
cheers
have
to
faith,
that,
right? Have faith in each other, have faith in our community, have faith in VR. Basgrim said it a long time ago, trust in VR. And we'll talk to you guys next week on The Rewind.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon.Plus Rewind. Be sure to follow Minus and all Pantheon.Plus related content on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube under the name Pantheon.Plus. Also, be sure to follow Therek at PantheonTherek on Twitter. Keep up to date on all Pantheon Rise of the Fallen information on www.Pantheon.Plus, the definitive source for all media of Pantheon. Until next time.